Hello everybody, this is TipTop MTG here today with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, we are taking a look at D&D Adventures in the Forgotten Realms and taking a look back on the mechanics of the set. So as the mechanics were being revealed, I did videos covering them and, I did spoiler videos talking about the specific cards, but a lot of the time I would say things like, well, I really can't judge this card until we know how plentiful Venture into the Dungeon cards are, or if there's any class-based, cards that interact with classes. And so in this video, we're going to kind of break down each mechanic a little bit, and then I'm going to give you my thoughts on them now that we've seen every single card in the set, including also the commander decks as well. So why don't we just jump right into this? So the first mechanic we're going to talk about is the class mechanic, and this is a very interesting one in my opinion. So essentially they are enchantments with the subtype of class, and they all have the ability on the top. And then you can pay mana to add the second ability, and then you can add mana to add the third. And some of them are like one-time effects like fighter class or ranger class, and a lot of them are persistent effects like barbarian class. Each one of those is a persistent effect. And in my opinion, these are really, really awesome. This is one of the mechanics that I didn't say I needed to see all of them. These are a mechanic that work very individually. And so when I talk about mechanics, there are a couple things I look at. For instance, there are a couple different types of mechanics. There are mechanics that really only work well if you are building a deck around them. There are mechanics that work if you just even throw one of them in a deck. And then there are mechanics that can do both. And those are my favorite types of mechanics. So let me give you an example of each. A mechanic where you could throw just one card with the mechanic in a deck would be something like Escape. And Escape actually doesn't work in both situations because if you have a quote-unquote escape deck, it's kind of parasitic. Like you're exiling cards from your graveyard, but you want to be returning those cards from your graveyard. So they don't really work well as a full-on deck. But as a one-of in a deck, it's a wonderful mechanic that allows you to get value. A mechanic that requires you to really go all out on it would be something along the lines of dungeons, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Or another example, let me think, let me run through. The devotion is a little bit of it, but that one I think does fall in the middle where you can just have one devotion type card. One example would be Mutate. For instance, yes, you can mutate it, and I would argue Mutate does kind of fall in the middle, but a lot of the effects are like when this mutates, do it for each other time it mutates. And so that's really encouraging you to go into that, build a deck around it style of gameplay. And so I think that's kind of interesting. It's unique in the fact that you get some really awesome decks built around it, but also then you end up with a bunch of unplayable cards. And then also when you have a mechanic that just goes in individual decks, it I think is better. So if I were to rank essentially the styles of decks, it would be, at the best type of mechanic is one that you can build the deck around, and they can go individually into decks, because you can then have your kind of gimmicky deck with those cards, but they're also not useless. They're not just part of that gimmick. They can also be played in other places. Then I'd rather have a mechanic where I can put the cards, like one card in a deck, and it still functions very well. And I think class is exactly that type of mechanic, and I think that it works really well. There's nothing in the set that like boost your classes. For instance, cards that say like if you're level 3 in a class, do X, Y, and Z. So I think that they are very individual style of cards. It's less of a mechanic and more of a card type, which is really what it is. But I do think that it is really, really awesome, and they are all very different. There is very few classes that I could say, oh yeah, I want to throw both of these in the deck. I mean, maybe you throw barbarian class and fighter class in a deck if you have an equipment-based dice rolling deck, but then you're getting into very niche categories. So I personally like cards that aren't just good, they are good in specific decks. And classes do that. They are unique, they are fun, they allow you to do something if you don't have mana. I just think they play incredibly well, and I just love the mechanic. At the end, we will rank all the mechanics, but just know these ones are really great. They can fit in all sorts of decks. They are niche, but not too powerful, so they're not like something you have to run in every deck. It's just if your deck happens to be an equipment deck, fighter class is going to be a good card. Next, we have dungeons. So these were revealed as the first mechanic of the set, and this was one where I really said, well, we have to see what cards say venture into the dungeon on them, because if it's a very difficult thing to trigger, something like Dungeon of the Mad Mage is going to be very difficult to get through. But if it's something where you can reliably do 3 or 4 of them every turn, it could be something that's pretty good. And remember those types of mechanics I was explaining earlier? Well, this one falls under the you kind of need to build a deck around it. If you have one card in your deck that makes you venture into the dungeon, and you're only playing it to venture into the dungeon, it's probably not that great. If it does something else and just happens to venture into the dungeon, that's fine because I'll gain a life, I'll scry, I guess I'll create a treasure token. But, I feel like it's one of those mechanics that really encourages you to build a deck around it. And I just don't think there was enough support with the venture into the dungeon cards. And I feel like a lot of the effects are just not that great. I mean, Ana and Artifact made it pay 3, tap, enter into the dungeon, activate only as a sorcery. So in their mind, each of these effects is quote unquote worth 3 mana, and I would be hard pressed to find someone who wants to pay 3 mana for a lot of these effects. Sure, I might see someone who plays 3 mana for 2 skeletons, and obviously this final level of Dungeon of the Mad Mage, but 3 mana even to get the final thing of Lost Mine of Pandelver, which is drawing a card, does not seem that great to me. So I do think it's going to be one of those things where it's a very, very niche deck, where like it's just there for fun. I mean, it's almost like a mask from War of the Spark. It never really saw any play, but it was nice to have a bonus on a card occasionally if you were using the card for another purpose. We've been seeing a lot of these style of mechanics where it's just like, yeah, they're not that good. I mean, learn lesson from Strixhaven. That was an example of a mechanic that it wasn't the best, but it was something kind of interesting. So I do think these will make fun decks if you do build around them, but I don't think they will have any impact on the meta, which I think is fine. Next, we have dice rolling. So in standard, it is only rolling d20s, and essentially, this is just an advanced way of coin flipping. I know a lot of people are upset about dice rolling. There's lots of different reasons. Spin down versus not spin down. It adds more randomness to the game, and people want it to be more about skill. And I definitely understand that. I think this is the most controversial mechanic in the set. But I want to take a look at Wizard Spellbook. So this is tap, exile target instant or sorcery card from a graveyard, roll a d20, activate only as a sorcery. Then, if you roll a 1 through 9, you copy that card. You may cast the copy. And then if you get a 10 through 19, you copy that card, and you may cast the copy by paying 1 rather than its mana cost. And then for 20, you can copy each card exiled with Wizard Spellbook. You may cast any number of copies without paying their mana cost. So here's what I want you to think about. This card is almost just tap, exile, target instant or sorcery card from a graveyard, flip a coin, which is already something that exists in the game. I feel like a lot of these effects, and you can see that, are side A, side B, and then a very rare occasional 20, which all 3 of these things are. And I think that you have to look at that and realize, oh wait, we have stuff that is very, very similar to this. It's just like a coin flip, but there's a chance that the coin lands on its side, is essentially kind of what this mechanic is. And a lot of these, not all of them, but a lot of these work like that, where it's like side A, side B. Now there is a big influx of them. We don't get a lot of coin flipping, but it's not something that seems that crazy new to me because it does just feel like a coin flip. There are a couple cards where it is literally just 1 through 10 and then like 11 through 20, and it's like, okay, you might as well have just flipped a coin, but they're doing it for flavor. And so I think that you have to kind of take a step back and say this isn't actually that crazy new for Magic. It's just a way for coin flipping to be a little bit different, and fit within the flavor. So I think that it's not my favorite mechanic because whenever I'm judging cards, I'm judging them by the lowest roll or the least valuable thing. So for instance, Chaos Channeler, 4 mana. I assume this card says, when it attacks, exile the top card of my library, you may play it this turn. A 4/3 for 4 that does that isn't the best thing in the world, but it's not awful. And then you do have that occasional upside where you get 2 cards from your library, or 3 cards from your library. So I do think that if you are judging these correctly, you need to, they are fine cards, but the thing is they played it very safe. So there are not many cards that I would say are super powerful. I'm including mythics and rares here. And yes, Wizard Spellbook seems pretty good because it has kind of a backup. If you roll a low roll, eventually you might be able to just copy those cards anyway. And I think that's really cool. But I do think that you just need to kind of lower your expectations. It seems like we're going through a power down phase, and these dice rolling cards really see that. And then the last one is less of a mechanic, but I still do want to talk about it. It is flavor text. So essentially, there was like flavor text on either decision based cards or just on abilities. For instance, Blink Dog has teleport, and they don't do anything functionally, and it's just for flavor. I've also seen some controversy around this one, mostly for the like unintuitiveness of it. For instance, Undergrowth from Guilds of Ravnica has the exact same formatting, except people are saying that's confusing, but also you have to think about it. Undergrowth is kind of just confusing. Why does it say undergrowth? What does that mean? It literally just is a descriptor. It's like landfall. It's like, why does it say landfall? Why? Because, it does. It's just for, to kind of tie these together, even though we have cards that say whenever a land enters the battlefield, blah, 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 that don't say landfall. And so I feel like we're just going to not see those as mechanics anymore. And going forward, we're going to just see a lot more of these style of effects because they technically don't mean anything. And that's the same thing with those older, mechanics, undergrowth, landfall. They technically don't do anything, just like this. So I don't think it's that confusing to new players to say, hey, if it's italicized, it doesn't mean anything. And I actually think this almost helps with that understanding and being like, wait, undergrowth, does that have some other meaning I'm not understanding? So yeah, I think that is actually pretty good, although I don't think we're going to see it immediately. I think it's going to be one of those things where we see it in Universes Beyond, people are going to get used to it, and then eventually it just moves into being a regular part of sets. All right, guys, so those were the 4 mechanics. I kind of want to talk about my ranking of them. In my opinion, the best mechanic in the set is classes. I think they are unique, dynamic, they promote healthy gameplay patterns, they help fill in those turns where you may have some extra mana, and they are cards that none of them seem broken, and they all just seem like they're going to fit into a deck really nicely, but not fit into every deck. Next, I would say it's probably dungeons. They're unique and fun and really, really interesting, but they're just not at the power level to compete. But I do think if you are building a dungeon deck with the expectation of it being lower powered, you can have a lot of fun. Then I would say it's dice rolling. This one is kind of weird. It just adds more variance to your cards, but a lot of people love those luck-based commanders. U3 of Fortune's Flame, is one of those things where it's like, oh, you gotta win 5 coin flips. And people really like those effects generally, but they seem to have played it really, really safe, again, leading to lower power ones. And I don't think rolling a die is as fun as venturing into the dungeon, so that puts it slightly under there for me. And then flavor words are less of a mechanic and just, it doesn't end up mattering, so they end up on the bottom of that list. Either way, guys, I want to know what you guys think about each of these mechanics in the comments down below, or you can do like a ranking like I did. I just want to know your guys' thoughts. I hope you guys enjoy. Also, I'm going to be doing a poll on my community tab where I list all 4 of those as the mechanics, and you can vote on which one's your favorite, and we can see what you guys think. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe to see more awesome content like this. You can also check out my Twitter and Discord in the comment or in the description down below. See you guys in the next one. Bye.